More than 5,000 years before this figurine was created, at the end of the last ice age, agriculture and cattle breeding appeared for the first time in the world. From this beginning, everything that we are was developed. Today, 12,500 years past this beginning, we stand at another threshold, at another turning point. We stand boldly, with the capability in hand to destroy everything that we have created, and ourselves with it, and to do this in the space of 15 minutes. Nuclear war has become an aspect of our civilization that can never be explored in retrospect to be understood, as there will be no one remaining to do so afterwards. Nuclear war is an aspect of what became of our culture that can only be explored before it happens, to prevent it. The introspection is critical, as the dimensions discovered there may furnish us the needed means to bury nuclear war before it buries us. With this in mind, what will decide which will be the victor in the end? Will it be the fire of nuclear war, or the light of our humanity in the heart to stage an era of freedom with the kind of brilliance that is due to the most precious gem of life on our planet, which is the human being? One potential of this turning point before us was demonstrated on August 6th and 9th in 1945 with the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. From this time on, no other imperative has consumed more resources and more efforts by the most skilled and dedicated of society than the preparation for nuclear war with the intention to prevent it. But how much did we win by this effort? Did we win anything at all? The end of the big war, which we call World War II, did not become the beginning of peace. It became instead the beginning of terror that was intended to define the post-war period, not the quest for peace. Terror rose out of the ashes of war. The city of Dresden in Germany, one of the cultural gems of Europe that had survived the war unscathed, was literally demolished in the final days of the war, not as a military necessity, but as a terror demonstration. In a 14-hour bombing campaign by 1,300 heavy bomber aircraft, 500,000 people were burned to death. In this orgy of terror, more than 7,000 tons of firebombs and high explosives had been poured onto this city. The city had been overflowing with 600,000 refugees who had fled the front line that was barely 100 kilometers away from the city. There had been hope in the air. The end of the war had been in sight. Churchill apparently had not been happy about that. It is reported that he had asked for suggestions of how best the city could be set ablaze. This wasn't planned for a strategic purpose, as the man sat in his chair in Yalta with a smug satisfaction. The planned purpose was terror, an orgy of terror that was not designed to end a war, but to usher in a new age, the age of the modern empire. The terror bombing was unleashed 3 days after the photograph was taken. Churchill knew that Roosevelt, a dying man at the time, would be in Egypt on a diplomatic mission when Dresden would burn. The horror itself was evidently directed at Stalin to demonstrate to him the power and the resolve of the empire that would become the new platform for the post-war period. The orgy of terror that night would also have been directed at President Roosevelt to quench his spirit to live. The firebombing of Tokyo began 4 days after the Dresden Holocaust had ended. Tokyo was bombed 14 times from this day on, until just weeks before the atom bombs were ready to be used. In the largest of the attacks on Tokyo, more than 260,000 buildings were destroyed. Fierce winds, feeding the fires, had whipped the flames in the walls of fire that blocked the path of those fleeing for their lives. An estimated 1.5 million people had lived in the burnt-out areas. Nobody knows how many or few survived. Roosevelt died less than a month later in the shadow of the attack that became the largest Holocaust in history, including the atomic bombing. Hiroshima, however, was destroyed much more easily in a single campaign of war that was carried out in just minutes by a single aircraft dropping only a single bomb. With this, the reign of terror had been raised onto a higher level, and for this to be successful, the war had been prolonged until the bombs were ready for the demonstration exercise. Japan's surrender, which is said to have been offered in June through the Vatican, was not accepted until the atomic bombing was done, at which point it was accepted under essentially the same terms as originally offered. Until then, the total unconditional surrender of Japan had been demanded, which was laid out in July at the Potsdam Conference. Here too, the objective had been terror. An enormous thrust of terror was planned for the post-war period. The nuclear war terror, as a weapon of empire, was intended to be expanded onto such a vast scale that it would force all the nations of the world to lay down their sovereignty at the feet of a global empire world government that would rule all nations from behind the wall of terror of the atomic bomb, to enslave them. Well, it didn't quite happen as it had been planned. A plan had been concocted and had been well advanced to wipe the Soviet Union off the map. Resulting terror origin on this scale would have demonstrated to the world that resistance to the demands of empire is futile. The empire would have won, but it didn't win. Instead, by its terror, it won for itself the identity of a political cesspool in which every trace of humanity had been totally erased. The Soviet Union spoiled the cesspool's blood. It defended its sovereignty and with it its existence. It developed its own nuclear bomb, in which the cesspool got a taste of its own nature, and it didn't like it. This happened back in 1951. With this intervention, on the basis of the sovereignty of the human being, the Soviet Union not only countered the empire and saved itself, it also gave humanity a new chance to survive. Living in the shadow of empire, with no sovereignty of its own to resist it, humanity would have been doomed. With its own bomb, the Soviet Union pushed back against the cesspool and effectively closed the door on the masters of empire before their coveted world empire could be established. This is something that no other nation on the planet had dared at the time, and in addition, the Soviet Union did this decisively. It had built a bigger bomb. With the Soviets' intervention, the terror train became derailed that was designed to force the nations of the world into compliance with the dictates of empire, for which many millions had already been murdered by then. Empire could no longer force itself upon the world in the shadow of this encounter. A new age had begun to dawn, from which on the present world stage developed. With their hellish horns clipped, though their cesspool mentally not defeated, the masters of empire created from their sewer a new game of terror, that they in a rare statement of honesty called mutually assured destruction. They had recognized that they could no longer win on their original platform, but they also recognized that they could still destroy the world. Thus, they made sure that this option would never go away. Now, with the empire itself fast collapsing in a self-made extinction collapse, evidence is coming to the surface that the masters are prepared to exercise the option they had assured themselves they would retain, to destroy the world alongside of them while they are going down. The only option that humanity has to counter the modern terror threat of extinction by nuclear war is to vacate empire from the landscape of civilization. Freedom rests on sovereignty. Empire rests on eradicating sovereignty, and ultimately mankind itself with nuclear war. No technological option exists to prevent this outcome. Effective countermeasures against nuclear war do not exist. The survival of humanity, therefore, depends entirely on its commitment to develop its inner resources, its sovereignty, its humanity, which are the greatest real power on our planet. Empire can be defeated by humanity discovering, developing, and extending its inherent potential, the potential of a human being. On this path, on which the defeat of empire is assured, the nuclear war threat ends. Until it becomes recognized that empire, the not-so-mythical white spider, is the enemy of humanity, which is in fact the only real enemy that humanity has on this planet, by which it becomes trapped and poisoned, humanity remains in grave danger. Russia had been alert to the white spider. It had learned from bitter experience to be aware of empire that sucks the lifeblood out of everyone it can catch. And being alert of this grave danger, it created an intervention that caused the spider to back off, which a human being is uniquely capable of. Thereby, it saved itself. By understanding the nature of the threat, Russia gave itself the edge to save its existence. Russia saw the cesspool of empire the way it is. It saw it as an oligarchic system that is empty and devoid of humanity and any real power. However, empire, has learned to steal whatever power it desires whenever nations carelessly let go of their sovereignty. The Soviets became well aware of the system of empire, from the advantage of their unique vantage point, since the fundamental architecture of the communist system had been created in the workshops of empire in the first place. Thus the Soviets experienced the white spider intensively and developed a defense against it by building up a strong, unyielding sovereignty. They created the Iron Curtain, the strongest sovereign defense against empire ever built to date. The USA, too, had learned to be aware of the white spider and built a defense against it by establishing its own sovereignty as a nation. Its unique vantage point was the scientific awareness of its founders and their keen awareness of the oligarchic system. Unfortunately, the nation let its guard down far too often and fell prey to the white spider on too many occasions. America was killed by it again and again and dragged into the cesspool by it. This is where it stands today. It serves the cesspool of empire, and in this service it threatens the whole of mankind with nuclear war extinction. In order for mankind to have a future, its highest priority must be to aid America to climb out of the cesspool and claim its humanity and its sovereignty back. Failing that, the epoch of mankind will end in its extinction in the nuclear fire. The challenge to aid America to rescue itself may be the tallest challenge that mankind has ever faced and will ever face, which it must master in order to meet the Ice Age challenge that also looms before it and may be near. The Soviets and Chinese have pioneered themselves a path to freedom under difficult circumstances, tried by fire many a time, and had their freedom also badly abused at times. Nevertheless, they stand as pioneering examples in the world with a revolutionary breakthrough that needs to be further developed for the freedom of all mankind from the tentacles of empire to be realized. It took the cesspool of empire decades of subversion and the most horrible war of all times to break Russia's sovereign defenses down for a season with the help of traitors from within. This tragedy appears to have been reversed, while America's reversal to its once cherished humanity and sovereignty remains still lagging. The danger of nuclear war in our time, and the path to eliminate nuclear war from the world, can only be seen correctly in mankind's sovereign defense against the white spider. Every other perception colors the scene erroneously. The bombing of Hiroshima must never be seen as an American operation, or the bombing of Dresden as a British operation. Instead, the finger must point to the cesspool, and humanity must acknowledge to itself that they did it, the sewer creatures, the creatures of the disease called empire that has festered for millennia in an environment of increasing decadence. Empire is a cultural disease that rose out of the deep cesspool of ancient oligarchic decadence, beginning in the early stages of the dawn of civilization. That empire is not a natural or national expression is evident by its lack of a principle to support itself and its thereby inevitable extinction collapse. No historic empire has ever existed that has not collapsed and extinct itself, though many nations throughout history have claimed to be empire and to be immune from this fate. But not one ever has. Neither will the current one be an exemption. However, Like the Roman Empire had nearly destroyed civilization. The current one has been given the potential, foolishly, to take the world down with it as it dies in its self-extinction collapse. Right to the present day, the nature of empire has remained true to its character as the cultural disease that has been left unhealed, that has festered for millennia and has grown worse thereby. Empire bears the smile of a blood-faced liar, speaking of human rights while financing and organizing mass atrocities all over the world to destabilize nations. Haven't we seen this all before? Empire stands before the world as a gilded shell without a heart that stabs even its admirers into the back. It stands as a policy without humanity, a sewer in which not even the rats feel secure and at home, a glittering sword that entices the world to bow to the ground and sacrifice its living for those whom it calls master, while it bleeds to death. Empire can only steal. For this, it hides behind its weapons. It has never created a single element that uplifts civilization. Empire is devoid of humanity. It is, for these reasons, and many more, unfit to exist in a world of civilization. Empire is only able to create terror by its heartless nature, unleash war, and inflict fascist destruction. And from the deepest depths of its cesspool, it now demands the world to inflict depopulation on itself, to reduce humanity to less than 1 billion people in the vain hope that inflicting the most horrendous global holocaust ever will avoid its own inevitable collapse extinction. The counterpole to empire is that which represents the power of our humanity, our honesty, creativity, productivity, recognition, understanding, technologies, and so on. Humanity is the power behind the functioning of everything in the physical world, which is the platform of its wealth and its power to even challenge the sky. Our humanity as human beings is not a personal and ethnic quality, but is represented in all of the numerous cultures in the world that take a stand, resisting empire by means of a new human renaissance. On the platform of this human renaissance, we can get civilization to fly. We are not there yet. Empire still exists and is holding humanity down, forcing its own cultural decadence on us in order to prevent us from launching our new renaissance. This means that the fight for society's self-development has not yet been taken up with sufficient intensity to get us off the ground. We are still vulnerable until this ground-level fight is won, because empire is and remains an earth-hugging terrorist, the only terrorist, the hardcore terrorist, and the only terrorist in the world. But as we rise above all that, where empire cannot reach to, we are free. Kepler would urge us to look at the doctrines that are staged in the quest of empire to rule the world and to keep it tied to the earth. And then he would also urge us to look at the evidence of what is really happening all around us. He would urge us to look at the epicycles of lies that are spun to justify the doctrines of empire, which cannot stand up in the light of real evidence. Kepler would promise that we'd be shocked by what we would discover if we follow his advice. Oh yes, we are shocked. All options are on the table. What does this mean? Does anybody know? Are we facing once again the maximum option, the final solution? Are we facing a plan in progress that has been in the works for decades already, promoted from the highest thrones of empire, to depopulate the world to less than 1 billion? Oh yes, that's what we see. Kepler would say, look at the doctrines. Look at the evidence. What combines the present foremost hotspots in the world? But why would we listen to Kepler in these regards? Kepler was an astronomer. He lived in the 1600s. We live in a different world now. Our politics are different. Oh, is this really so? We live in a world where people have closed their eyes to what they do not wish to see. That's what the astronomers had done for nearly 2,000 years prior to his time. Kepler did the opposite. He looked at things that didn't make any sense when seen with just the eyes. With this kind of commitment to open his eyes, he started a new era in science that changed the world. Now let's apply Kepler's method to the modern world, where we see trends unfolding that make absolutely no sense at all, like trends towards nuclear war, but which have wide support. Oh yes, many may disagree on this point. Kepler would say, open your eyes, people. The modern trends towards nuclear war have wide support. Iran is targeted by empire for its strategic location and its long historic ties with much of Eurasia, including Russia, India and China, the historic targets of empire. It has been chosen to serve as the detonator for blowing up Eurasia as a whole, especially Russia that stood in the way of the world empire's domination since 1951. Iran is being vilified as the devil who wants to build a nuclear bomb. That's the kind of game by which Iraq had been vilified as the devil that has been said to be building weapons of mass destruction. No evidence has been found to date for either accusation. Iraq didn't have plans to build weapons for mass destruction. This had been amply verified before the war began. Iraq was destroyed on the basis of lies as a step towards the next step. Iran now gets the same treatment on the same basis of lies. Teams of international inspectors with full access to the entire country had found no evidence for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Nor has any evidence been discovered for atom-building projects being pursued in Iran that the war criers accuse Iran of. Civilian nuclear power development is being pursued in Iran, which isn't a crime and is pursued by many countries throughout the world, because the future of humanity depends totally on advanced energy development. Of course, these are all but smokescreen issues dished up for public enragement to get the strategic war started towards the empire's long-standing cesspool goal of forced world domination. The bottom line is that there exists no rational basis for anyone waging a war against Iran. Iran is a modern, stable nation. It has never attacked another country in modern history. Nevertheless, the Cold War against Iran is being sharply intensified The evidence that one can glean from this background is that the masters of empire aim to use Iran as a stepping stone to stir up a nuclear war against Russia, which invariably becomes a global nuclear war that fundamentally alters what remains of the world. The vast size of Iran, its mountainous terrain, and the strong nationalistic character of the population make it impossible to militarily defeat Iran at the present stage without the war becoming a nuclear war. This may be the real criterion for which it has been selected as a target at the present stage. The recognition of this obvious fact has been openly admitted by the American President Obama, who has stated repeatedly that if Iran cannot be defeated in the conventional sense, all options are on the table. This bold stand for insanity is a desperate move against Russia that has blocked the empire's reach for world domination since 1951. The balance that Russia established against the plans of empire is being attacked. The goal is to start and win the war that no one can survive. This deeply irrational and desperate commitment to stage a war that ends in global suicide doesn't reflect America's historic culture, but it reflects the long-standing sick culture of empire that has historically depended on creating chaos and war to save itself. This cultural disease has not been healed. What comes out of the cesspool of millennia of increasing cultural decadence would not be regarded as a rational response towards building a secure future for humanity. The cesspool should be drained before it draws the whole of humanity into its muck. Right now, the world is rushing into this muck, driven by an intention that is not its own, that is imposed on it, thinly veiled as the need for a big war is seen as becoming critical for the existence of empire, as its game of looting the world is collapsing and the populations are rising up against the rule of empire where it is already established. The entire system of empire has collapsed itself into an end game, that the masters are putting everything they've got onto the line to prevent their dying system from being wiped off the map. They, the masters of the game, are fully aware of their volatility, far more so than the rest of the world is. That is why they are still able to push their big war against the very existence of humanity. They had feared this outcome from 1951 onward, at which time the depopulation ideology was put into high gear. There is a good reason why the Cold War against Iran doesn't make any sense, because the war drive cannot be understood by looking at Iran itself. The reason is that the war against Iran isn't about Iran. The evidence tells us that the war has a far wider dimension that cannot be recognized by focusing on the nation of Iran and its aspirations. Kepler would say, "Open your eyes, look at the wider horizon, look at the big game, look at the game of empire and its core doctrine. Then locate Iran into this context, and Syria likewise. Attacking Iran and Syria serve a single purpose, and this purpose is so big that it defies the imagination." If one looks at Iran from a strategic perspective, it becomes self-evident why a close relationship with Iran would be extremely valuable for Russia, that would enable early warning radar installations to be located there for the earliest possible missile launch detection of submarine-based missiles. It would be surprising if Russia would not have such radar installations set up. Syria is of similar importance for Russia in the Mediterranean region for early warning missile launch detection. When the entire attack time is as short as a coffee break, the earliest possible detection is critical in order that a counterstrike can be launched before it becomes impossible to do so. For as long as the early warning radars remain in place and operational, both in Syria and in Iran, a surprise first nuclear strike attack against Russia cannot be pulled off. This is the evident reason for the war cries against Syria and Iran, and why 2 American aircraft carrier groups are positioned off the coast of Syria, and 2 more off the coast of Iran, to attack the radars and thereby enable the first strike nuclear surprise attack on Russia to proceed. This long-planned nuclear surprise attack against Russia will proceed, unless it is stopped on the American side by removing America's president, the war president, an agent of the cesspool, from his office. Apart from this, nothing will likely be sufficient to prevent the war from erupting. The preparations for the nuclear surprise attack are already in progress. Israel stands ready to sacrifice itself by delivering the opening shot in the coming attack on Iran. The annual conference of the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee, the AIPAC conference, has been brought forward in 2012 to convene in early March in order to get the war hysteria heated up fast before the cesspool of empire evaporates under the current collapse crisis. The AIPAC rally is a war rally. War is the primary topic on the agenda. But war does not bring security. Peace alone brings security. The 1648 Peace of Westphalia brought security to Europe after nearly 100 years of war, in which many a village and small city had simply vanished, as if they had never existed. War cries are cries for suicide, no matter what the official theme may be. War had been the prime agenda at Hitler's Nuremberg rallies in the 1930s. Few of those who stood tall and proud in those rallies were still alive when the cacophony of war ended. Nor did Germany itself survive the war. It never recovered to become the beautiful cultural gem again that it had been before the wars started. Russia is again the target for destruction, demanded by the cesspool of empire, with China, India added to the list. America stands coerced to facilitate the destruction this time, and thereby to commit suicide, just as Germany had done in the 1930s. Of course, this suicide too is intentional, just as Germany's suicide had been and is again demanded by the same masters of the cesspool. On this path of demanding universal suicide by war, the cesspool aims, this time around, to clear the slate of all its adversaries in one fell swoop before it itself collapses. Except the plot won't work, will it? there appears to be still more than enough of the residual sense of sovereignty remaining in America, so that the cesspool's plan won't have a chance to succeed. Sure, the cesspool has succeeded in selecting a mentally impaired person to become the United States President, a man with a severe case of narcissistic personality disorder, a man who can be easily bought. They bought for their selected puppet his election victory, with the most lavishly financed election campaign of all times, supported by a long string of electoral abuses. And even then, he barely made it through the gate, even with death threats against the opposition, etc. They own the little man. They tell him how to dance, how to read the teleprompter, how to succeed with bullying tactics, how to give the treasury away for bailout money, and how to remain president with a forged birth certificate that got him onto the throne illegally, which some say is still being challenged by law enforcement agencies. However, all the cesspool stuff that the masters have dished up through his mental disease has not yet fully eroded the historic sense of sovereignty in the population. They, the cesspool creatures, may own their little man in the White House, and they may even own the Congress and the Senate by his bullying tactics. But there remains nevertheless a sense of sovereignty in the people that will block the entire war circus of the cesspool from setting the world on fire and destroying America with it. The little man's hands have been blocked by the sense of sovereignty of some patriots, and they will be blocked again and again, as they must be blocked for America and humanity to survive. Thus they will be blocked evermore by the principle of sovereignty asserting its claim and power in America, because the people's sense of sovereignty is the one element of power that really counts in the end, which the masters of the cesspool do not own, or have themselves, or have any knowledge of. The key factor for protecting humanity and civilization is the factor of universal sovereignty. America has even built a giant monument as a symbol of its sovereignty. The traditional enemy of empire has always been Russia, China, India, and the USA, the big nations of the world that the masters of empire have aimed to capture, loot, and control, but have ultimately failed at, and not for the lack of trying. The modern game of the Western Empire, the cesspool empire, the only empire that remains standing in the world, has been focused on subduing Russia, China, and India for years to conquer them and rule them, as it has already conquered the USA and Europe and keeps them firmly under its thumb. However, Russia, China, and India, to some degree, have become ever more resistant to be so ruled and looted. They aim to develop themselves instead, which is deemed a crime against empire. Now, with empire itself fast collapsing, and all the nations under its thumb likewise collapsing economically and culturally, the entire scene is shifting so that the insane endgame of war has been put under the table to destroy them all collectively, both those who have resisted empire and those who might do so in the future. The apparent plan is to kill them all. The plan is on the table, and this means global nuclear war. The goal is to depopulate the planet to less than 1 billion people, whereby the remaining would be mired in the poverty of a new dark age and be pliable to be ruled forever. This type of insane plan appears to be in control. It is in the process of being implemented according to all evidence. Still, it won't succeed if the American society removes its war precedent from the throne so that the nation and the world can have a future. The cesspool of empire and its stooges are not an omnipotent adversary, because the cesspool is inherently unintelligent. It is the center of insanity. The creatures in the cesspool spit on humanity, on sovereignty, on creativity, science, and the principle of the general welfare. This is the reason why the cesspool is presently collapsing, and its masters' insane endgame, their plan to deprive humanity of its living, will be collapsing in the same manner. The chief cornerstone around which this collapse will happen will be society's growing sense of humanity, its intelligence, and the inherent sovereignty of the human being. With intelligence raising the principle of sovereignty to new height, the liberty of the nation can be assured. The task to express sovereignty isn't really so difficult that a mentally impaired president who threatens America and the world cannot be removed from office. There never was a nation that stood on the crest of sovereignty that had allowed itself to be defeated from within or without, or both. The ongoing war with Iran has enabled the physical staging of the war machine for a swift nuclear first strike against the Eurasian continent. Syria has been set up in the same manner to serve the same purpose in the Mediterranean. Offshore from both locations, 2 American aircraft carrier battle groups have been stationed. 4 in total, all set up at once. At this time also, the tensions over the American anti-missile installation in Poland heated up. But once it becomes known for which reasons the war cries and the prepared attacks are fielded, society's sense of sovereignty will tend to turn the tide against the cesspool. America has had a long history of defending its home ground against the cesspool of empire from its very founding on. By the force of its own history, the American society will ultimately be more inclined in aiding Russia in its self-defense against the cesspool, rather than standing against Russia on behalf of the cesspool. The principle of sovereign self-defense is in America's blood, so to speak. For this reason, America will remove the nuclear war threats against Russia, including its ABM systems in Poland, as soon as its war precedent has been removed from the seat of power. A far-flung mobile anti-missile capability that is routinely upgraded and modernized could easily conceal hardware with an offensive capability. With Russia being denied inspection rights, it sees itself becoming surrounded with potential nuclear weapons launch platforms staged in close proximity to the very heart of Russia, It sees itself severely threatened, with 4 of America's superclass aircraft carriers stationed at its southern flank. Ironically, not a single aircraft carrier is of any use against what America is officially targeting in Iran, which officially are the deeply buried nuclear materials processing facilities. The targets in Iran that all the fuss is about are so well protected in secure locations that only the giant bunker buster bombs can damage them. These giant bombs, however, are far too large to be transported by any aircraft carrier-based aircraft. The 30,000-pound massive ordnance penetrator bomb is so large that America's frontline bomber, the B-2, can carry only a single one of them, and the B-52 no more than 2. Considering that none of the carrier-based aircraft can carry those bombs, why then are 4 aircraft carrier groups standing by? Why are they there when they are of no use for the stated main objective? Evidently, the aircraft carrier groups are required to serve a bigger and wider purpose. This purpose is nuclear war. The carrier groups do have nuclear-armed guided missile capabilities for local purposes, and could also have nuclear missile submarines attached to them as required and provide cover for their deployment. Considering that America's major nuclear weapons platform is sea-based, primarily on submarines, the placement of aircraft carrier groups near the shores of Russia as a protection for the offensive submarines brings to light a dangerous plan in the process of unfolding. The American Navy's 14 or higher class nuclear missile submarines carry half of the entire American nuclear weapons inventory. Each submarine carries 24 missiles, with 6 to 10 warheads per missile, enough to destroy Russia in the space of a coffee break, and beyond that, the entire Eurasian continent in less than half an hour, and 3 days later the USA also, with the effects of the fallout. The advantage of sea-based launch platforms is that they can be brought close to a target area for an almost instant effect that would almost surely trigger automated retaliation for the lack of time to weigh the options. Nuclear war has become a high-stakes game of winner-takes-all, which in practice is an illusion. The theory is that if an enemy can be knocked out before it is able to respond, then nuclear war is winnable. This doctrine is as much a deception as are all the other nuclear war doctrines, such as peace by mutually assured destruction. In reality, a full-scaled American attack, even if Russia couldn't respond, would destroy America together with everybody else, with the resulting fallout. Of course, Russia would counterattack. The resulting ejaculation of horror would ironically be consistent with the long-established goal of world depopulation that is cherished in the sewers of empire from which the last vestiges of humanity have been purged. In order to get a nuclear war plan implemented, the illusion is being maintained in the strategic planning offices that nuclear war is winnable, even while it is not. The evident intention behind nuclear war is that the war will not be won. This goal will be achieved with near absolute certainty when the prepared-for war is launched. Towards this end goal, the game is forced ahead. From a nuclear submarine-based platform positioned in the Mediterranean, Moscow can be eradicated in 11 minutes. With its capital erased, Russia would be strategically crippled. The timing suggests that Syria has been stirred up into a crisis state specifically for this purpose, as a cover to enable America's sea-based missile platform to be brought close to Russia and be protected there by the aircraft carrier forces. Syria hadn't been in a crisis state until the strategic requirement for it existed. At this point, the crisis was unleashed by external intervention. This kind of destabilization is all too easily done with mercenary rebels financed and supplied from the sewers of empire, such as the Al-Qaeda forces created from the heart of empire against the Soviet forces in Afghanistan, and wherever else terror operations are desired to serve the goals of empire. The term Al-Qaeda became the database name for the Mujahideen militants who had been recruited and trained by the CIA to harass the new socialist government in Afghanistan, to thereby draw the Soviets into Afghanistan and bog them down there in a Vietnam-style quagmire in order to weaken the Soviets and deliver a humiliating blow to communism in the end. This was the stated American plan for which Al-Qaeda was created, and the plan was carried out. The Democratic Republic of Afghanistan had been formed after the Saur Revolution in 1978. Its new government supported the poor and the farmers with a socialistic agenda. The government had formed close relationships with the Soviet Union. Its support of the common people had promptly inspired the Islamic Revolution in its neighboring country, Iran, which roused itself and ousted the American-backed Shah. In response to the loss of Iran, the empire turned its weight against Afghanistan, which couldn't defend itself against the CIA's Mujahideen militants. By this trick, the empire managed to drag the Soviet Union into the Afghan trap, as the project was initially referred to. After the Soviet Union was defeated in Afghanistan, the Mujahideen operation was carried on under the Al-Qaeda name, which simply means database. Afghanistan had a long Islamic history, which the Communist Revolution had violated. Al-Qaeda was organized from the cesspool of empire as the counter-revolution. With rich international support from numerous officers of empire, the Mujahideen movement was forged that fought a 9-year-long war of terror in which 2 million Afghani civilians were killed, 3 million wounded, 5 million became refugees, and 2 million became displaced. And in addition, 90,000 Mujahideens were killed also, together with 14,000 Soviet troops and 18,000 Afghan soldiers. a functional government didn't arise from these ashes. This was evidently the intention. The well-developed pro-Islamic terror organization and its ideological infrastructure, now named directly the Al-Qaeda, which had achieved the gory feat that forced the Soviets into retreat, were not dismantled after the Soviets had left. They simply continued on to serve the goals of empire to the present day. Syria became one of its latest victims for obvious reasons. Syria is a small, largely rural nation, abundant with olive trees and numerous religious backgrounds, and a root in ancient civilizations going back more than 7,000 years. It, like all the nations in the Middle East, became caught up in the modern terror storm that the masters of empire have unleashed with the injection of the State of Israel, which itself was built on a platform of terror from its very beginning on, such as the Deir Yassin massacre in 1948. The massacre was unleashed with such extreme terror that it triggered the huge Palestinian exodus of over 700,000 people who have never been allowed to return. Many of their houses were subsequently demolished in an operation called cleansing the landscape. Syria became dragged into the terror storm mandated from the cesspool of empire that ravished the entire Middle East region, and also Africa, for more than half a century already, still aiming for world domination. Syria is now being set up to play a much expanded role in the spreading of the cesspool of empire, with Russia being committed to block the invasion of Syria as an act of self-defense, and to block the larger war drive that stands behind it all. The destruction of Moscow that the now established setup in the Mediterranean could accomplish might also be accomplished 2 minutes sooner from the American ABM site in Poland. A modern ballistic missile could reach Moscow from Poland in 9 minutes or less, while such an option wouldn't target the entire Russian heartland to the Urals and beyond. A missile launched from Poland might well supply the opening salvo to destroy Moscow. This is the terror that Russia is now confronted with. Russia has an effective anti-missile system installed to protect Moscow that detonates a nuclear blast in the re-entry path of the warheads. However, it is highly unlikely that the protective system can shield the city against 3 simultaneous attacks from 3 different directions. Moscow's defense has been traditionally focused against attacks coming from the north. The Russian leaders have expressed great fear over the close proximity of the potentially offensive ABM installation in Poland. They have protested. They have tried to stop its construction and later gain inspection access, but to no avail. Officially, the American ABM system in Poland is designed to protect Europe against missiles from Iran. If this was really the case, the defense system against them would have been located more centrally to the potential targets, instead of being far distant from most of them. However, defense is evidently not the purpose for locating the American system in Europe. Its purpose is evidently offensive, and its location, as close to Moscow as can be arranged for the critical opening of the first strike preemptive game, proves the purpose to be offensive. The deep penetration of the Russian heartland can be accomplished in 13 to 14 minutes with missiles from the Mediterranean. At this point, roughly 15 minutes into such a war plan, Russia would have ceased to exist as a functioning nation. The war planners assume that such a near-total destruction can be accomplished so fast that Russia will not be able to launch a counterstrike. This irrational, near-mythical confidence is needed to get the war madness started that shouldn't even be called war anymore, but annihilation, according to the long-declared ultimate intention for depopulation. In order to cover all of Russia and to kill everyone in it fast and efficiently, the second launch base in the Indian Ocean would be required. This base exists. The Cold War with Iran has been painfully staged to enable the required base to be established at the northern coast of the Indian Ocean, close to Russia. China is also in range to be eradicated from this floating base, though it would take 8 or 9 minutes longer to reach China from there. Should China and Russia be concerned? Oh, they should be concerned. They should be scared. They are already both being vilified in the Western press as the devil. They see a fortified military base established near them, with the capacity to destroy both nations at once. This is not something that might happen. It is already happening. When should one be concerned, then, in such a case? Would one wait until the final step is taken and the missiles are launched? It would be too late, then, to be concerned. The entire world should be concerned over what has already happened, and scream, "You cannot do this!" It should do more than scream. It should act to defend itself, because it too would cease to exist when the next and final step was taken with the launching of the missiles. We are one step away from ceasing to exist, with the intention for this final step widely proclaimed and now boldly demonstrated. The USA maintains 8 or higher class submarines in the Pacific Basin with roughly 1,500 warheads mounted on 192 ballistic missiles. Quite a number of them will likely be staged closer to China for a faster attack, or further away for increased security. The new Trident II missiles have a 12,000-kilometer range, which means they can be launched from almost any place in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean against both Russia and China. From its floating nuclear launch bases, the American command has the physical capability to destroy the Eurasian and African continents and nearly all of the people living there in the time frame of roughly 15 minutes. However, before any of the missiles would explode, the Russians and Chinese counterstrikes would be on their way. In moments of a surprise attack with great strategic uncertainty resulting, Russia's and China's nuclear missiles would most likely all be launched within the first 9 minutes in a highly automated process. The short response time that the modern game of submarine-launched missiles is now imposing leaves no room for human intervention or discussion and decision-making. In this high-stakes game where the winner supposedly takes all, nothing is left to chance. When seconds determine the difference, the response has to be swift and automatic. The fallout from these weapons and from the counter-strikes would be transported by the jet streams throughout the hemisphere and leave no one alive, which in time would spread globally. There won't be any winners in the end, and possibly only a few survivors in the far corners of the globe, if indeed anyone survives at all. Ironically, this outcome is the objective that the entire game is set up to accomplish in the first place. The objective is this insane. Not surprisingly, it reflects the insanity that the disease called empire has inflicted on humanity. Ironically, the insanity that we see reflected in the modern military objectives shouldn't be surprising. What we see unfolding there is nothing more than the natural outcome of millennia of progressively cultivated decadence that has created the cultural cesspool called empire, in which the native humanity of a human being is rotted away to near extinction. If indeed even the faintest spark of humanity still remains in the cesspool. Not the slightest sense of humanity has historically been found in the rulings of empire. Cultivated starvation, intentional famines, the burning of food, and of late the outright demand for depopulation are all hallmarks of the disease of empire that continues to reach for world domination. The build-up towards nuclear war is not an isolated phenomenon in the world, but is an inherent element of this ongoing train to hell. In order to prevent nuclear war, the entire train needs to be stopped and reversed. Empire is an unhealed cultural disease that has festered for centuries. The symptom of the disease has grown ever more grotesque in its expression with every advancing stage of decadence. We are way past the stage where merely a city is erased. All of humanity is now threatened. Kepler would point out from personal experience that empire is a cultural disease that has infected civilization in its earliest stages, which has not only remained unhealed, but has festered for millennia, destroyed its subjects, and gradually pervaded the fabric of civilization like a spreading fungus. And he would add that once the disease is recognized for what it is, it can be healed. He simply stepped away from it and lived the life of a human being. Kepler would point out that empire is not a national phenomenon. Though many nations have become infested with the disease, such as Persia that became the Persian Empire, or Egypt that became the Egyptian Empire, and nations that became the Roman Empire, the Venetian Empire, and as of late the British Empire, with a long list of lesser empires emerging in between. Kepler would point out further that the scourge of war and the fascism manifest by the phenomenon of oligarchy are merely symptoms of the universal cultural disease that empire has become, which has become ever more devoid of humanity. Kepler would add that today's depopulation ideology, including the modern stage of burning food in automobiles, are clear symptoms that the disease called empire is becoming increasingly acute and is nearing the stage of its becoming fatal, and fatal for all who cling to it. Kepler would point out that it is not by accident, therefore, that the depopulation ideology, which makes no sense to a normal human being, originated in the cultural wasteland of empire, where the disease of decadence, monetarism, and fascism has festered for millennia and has destroyed the productive capacity of humanity. It is not by accident, therefore, that the depopulation mantra, including the green biofuels holocaust, is being promoted from the highest thrones of the ruling institutions of empire, where the disease breeds its fascism, war, oligarchic predation, and so on, which now as always forces its domination onto the world as far as it can reach, even to its death. Unless humanity can heal itself of the disease of empire that is killing it, with nuclear war now being fully on the table, the already planned final day for humanity may not be far off. In practice, no one can walk in two directions at once. Freedom and empire are focused in opposite directions. Time will not heal this impasse. History is littered with proof of that, and with many a proof that the cultural disease that empire is, when left unhealed, becomes more acute with every passing year towards our final doom. World War I and II were merely the most recent early symptoms of the disease becoming acute. They, in turn, were preceded by lesser, earlier symptoms, such as the empire's famine in India, its opium wars in China, and its civil war in America. Without society heeding these lesser warnings, no healing has been achieved in the early stages. As a result, the disease of empire became ever more acute, becoming a monster in the post-war period with the destruction of Palestine, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, with Syria and Iran already standing in the crosshairs to be the next in line, to be followed by Russia and China, with India and Africa set up to fall along the way. The wars that are now set up are not wars against nations, but are wars against humanity itself. No, the mere passing of time will not heal the disease called empire that has created a cesspool of inhumanity in the highest places of power. The passing of time does not heal anything. The passing of time only allows the disease to fester. There is no passive healing possible. The healing has to be pursued actively, with society committing itself to rebuilding its humanity that the disease has disabled or diminished the world over. Unless this healing begins, and begins soon, nuclear war will happen, for reasons that the disease has become critically acute. No other option for avoiding nuclear war exists than to purge the landscape of the disease of empire. All attempts to defeat the plans for nuclear war on any lesser platform have so far failed. The Strategic Arms Limitations Treaty have had no effect on the nuclear war danger, except to veil the danger. Thus the treaties have kept the plan for nuclear war alive. The treaties have merely shifted a portion of the nuclear arsenal from the strategic arena to the tactical arena that can accomplish essentially the same end. The disease hasn't been healed thereby, but is becoming increasingly veiled, with ever more band-aids covering to hide the symptoms. In 1986, the world had 65,000 nuclear bombs in its strategic arsenals. This has been reduced to 27,000. The difference has been shifted into the tactical arena, where the weapons are not counted, and some have been put on the shelf, where they are not counted either. Of course, some obsolete ones have been dismantled, while new ones have been built. No real disarmament has so far taken place, nor exists there an intention for it, and so we all remain self-doomed. The intention of empire to force humanity to commit itself to mutually assured suicide, with the burning of food on an ever-widening horizon of genocide, was evidently preparing the ground for the bigger holocausts to come. This expanding plan presently remains fully intact. The commitment to universal genocide has remained intact in spite of all the numerous weapons treaties. For as long as the cesspool rules, there will be no treaties possible to establish peace, progress, development, and humanity to become the foundation for a secure civilization. Instead of building towards peace and reducing the chance for a nuclear war, the nuclear war infrastructures have been legitimized, protected, and made ever more efficient in order to assure that such a war can be easily arranged when desired and be carried out with near absolute certainty. Nuclear war has become so efficient that the end of civilization and much of humanity with it can be achieved in 15 minutes. When the cesspool presses its demand on its stooges, the nuclear button will be pressed that unleashes the final holocaust. For as long as the once great nations of the world no longer own themselves, but are owned by the cesspool in countless ways, the layers of their institutions become weaker that would stay the hand that reaches for the button. Nuclear war is then easily started when the resistance erodes that precariously still prevents it, which it has successfully done on a number of occasions already. At the moment when one of the cesspool's puppets finds itself in full control of the power of the state, with ever fewer resisting the puppet, the nuclear button comes into reach for a full-scale surprise attack. A nuclear submarine attack can then be launched with complete impunity. In the nuclear war arena, the madman becomes omnipotent. There is no legal deterrent possible in this arena against a mad leader launching a surprise attack who has eliminated all opposition and finds himself in complete control. No deterrence rules on this scene, as no one would remain alive in the aftermath to ask the question why it was done, and to prosecute the offender. The danger already exists in the USA, whose president is mentally impaired with a severe case of narcissistic personality disorder. This mental disease typically results in irrational fantasies, dreams of omnipotence, a lacking sense of reality and lacking human empathy, rage, tough-minded overbearance, unemotional, exaggerated self-importance that is typically hiding a deep inner emptiness. Those suffering the disease seek grandiose acknowledgement and attention to offset their inner insecurity, whereby they become externally manipulated like puppets on a string. This type of severe mental impairment opens pathways to atrocities that would be inhibited by a normal person's sense of humanity. When this type of mental impaired person is given access to the nuclear button, then nuclear war, either by first strike or provocation or even self-provocation, is becoming increasingly imminent. Nuclear war can be started with a wide range of provocations, such as the current war rage against Iran, that is a thinly veiled threat against Russia, for which the nuclear war option is already on the table, as the President has openly threatened, saying all options are on the table. Nuclear war can also be started with the tried and proven method of self-provocation, such as the Gulf of Tonkin affair that unleashed the Vietnam War, or the Bay of Pigs affair in which, supposedly, the U.S. Navy would blow up one of its own ships as a provocation to launch a full-scale attack on Cuba. President Kennedy had blocked this mad scheme. After he was assassinated, the self-provocation scheme apparently succeeded in the Gulf of Tonkin that got the Vietnam War started. A nuclear replay would most likely be just as successful. When a nuclear missile rises out of the ocean from a submarine, can anybody tell with certainty who launched it? Many nations now have this capability, nor would anyone have the time to ask the question by whose hand the missile was launched. The counterstrike would be automatic. No institution would then be able to prevent a counterstrike. In essence, the world's arms treaties have become mutually assured suicide treaties. Nuclear war has become essentially an extension of the growing acquiescence by society to the demands of empire to commit universal suicide. That's what rules the world today on a wide platform. Nuclear war needs to be seen in this context and be overturned in this context, because it is in this context that it is likely to happen. For as long as the cesspool, empire, remains standing, the weapons remain in force and will be kept secure from abolition. Thereby, their capability to destroy the world many times over, without warning, without recourse, remains protected and fully assured for the purpose defined in the cesspool of empire. This is what the underlying doctrine of mutually assured destruction stipulates, as it has been served up from the countless sewers that flow into the cesspool of empire that gave the world a demonstration of its colors with its holocausts in Dresden, Tokyo, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and with the post-war preparations for wiping Soviet Russia off the map. With a staunch and unrelenting commitment to nuclear war, for which the nuclear war weapons exist, society assures itself the destruction of what remains of its civilization. It assures its own annihilation, and it assures the depopulation of the planet. These are all aspects desired by the culturally insane that are bred in the cesspool of empire in abundance. The cesspool has no name, nationality, culture, and humanity. It is the international monetarist system, exemplified by the old British Empire and its monetarist sewer called the City of London. Today, the entire worldwide cesspool that lives on the collective outflow from the near worldwide system of its sewers is on the edge of self-extinction. Nothing works anymore. All of Europe is disintegrating. How the many stooges of the cesspool will respond to the impending collapse of the entire sewer system in the coming days or months cannot be determined, except to say that it promises to be not pleasant. All the Euro nations, which no longer own themselves, are economically collapsing for this very reason. With the stench of the collapse, the heat is rising in the cesspool towards an impending explosion of hyper-intensified insanity that may drag the world into its grave on the fantasized delusion that a nuclear war can be won and the system of the cesspool be saved thereby. That is where we are today. The heat is rising. The continuity of the entire monetarist system that is foundational to the system of empire is evaporating. It has stood since before the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, the Venetian Empire, the Anglo-Dutch system of empire, to the present-day oligarchic empire. Its era of increasingly escalating decadence is ending. Nothing can save the cesspool that developed, no matter how strongly its masters dream that the surrendering of Russia, China, and India to its grasp can save the cesspool. And this isn't likely to happen anyway. The epoch of world empire domination has functionally already ended. However, humanity can still save itself by escaping the cesspool and rebuilding its economies, not on a new monetarist system, but on the long-established platform of sovereign credit for national productive physical development. The escape from empire has begun. The universal escape from it by the whole of humanity is possible. This Renaissance potential the creatures in the cesspool fear the most, since such an escape, once it happens, would irreversibly end the epoch of empire. To a large degree, the escape has already begun. It is in progress in China, India, and Russia. Thus, the faster the universal escape from the cesspool unfolds, which threatens to become a mass escape all across Europe in the months ahead, the more desperately will the remaining cesspool creatures reach for the nuclear button as if this could save them. This is the desperation that stands behind the war cries against Syria and Iran. The war cries have nothing to do with humanitarian concerns or security concerns, or the non-existing Iranian plans to make an atomic bomb, as if this would matter in a world brimming with more than 60,000 of them, held by numerous nations. The war cries spouted against Iran are in reality directed against Russia and China, as a last-minute attempt to get them to submit themselves to the cesspool, which they are not inclined to do. This is what stands behind the repeated declarations from the cesspool that all options are on the table. Nuclear arms treaties have never been designed to overturn the mutually assured destruction doctrine that assures nuclear war, much less the cesspool from which the game is orchestrated. True security in the world can only be found with the cesspool becoming abolished, whereby the nuclear weapons can be abolished too. The task to abolish the cesspool and its demands for universal war is not an easy one to accomplish, but it can be accomplished by society's retrospection and introspection and its resulting commitment to its all-embracing universal humanity. Without these, one or the other of the many plans will succeed to blow the world up. I deal with this danger in my novel, Brighter Than the Sun, and with the difficulties of rescuing ourselves by overcoming the deep isolation and division that the agents of the cesspool have cultivated over countless ages. The novel was started in the 1980s at the height of the Cold War and updated in the 1990s, but its focus is more relevant today than it was then. The only treaty that can be effective against nuclear war is the treaty that we thus make with ourselves as human beings and with one another on the platform of universal respect and universal love for our common humanity and the common aims of all mankind. Such a treaty would foster a commitment to rediscover ourselves and redevelop our humanity that has been largely eroded. And this project is grand, beautiful, wide and enriching. Yes, listen to the symphony of our humanity. In this symphony we are one with the universe itself. However, in writing the novel Brighter Than the Sun, it quickly became apparent that the key aspect in our self-discovery is the discovery and development of the principle of universal sovereignty on a higher platform than the one on which it is commonly perceived. Sovereignty is fundamental to civilization. All beauty is sovereign. It is subject only to the heart, as we too may find ourselves one day. If one breaks the principle of sovereignty, one has nothing left, no life. Without sovereignty, we have no security, and society dies in countless different ways. Since the challenge of universal sovereignty takes us far beyond war and the cesspool world, I started writing another novel that I had called The Lodging for the Rose. I soon discovered that the exploration of universal sovereignty, developing towards universal love, opens up a vastly larger world to be discovered. By the time the exploration was completed, this single novel had become a series of 12 novels, for which the original title was retained as the overall title. The 12 novels, too, seem to be more relevant to the modern nuclear war crisis than the Cold War crisis of the 1980s and the early 1990s. It will likely remain relevant for some time to come, until sovereignty is fully established and the concept of nuclear war is but a distant memory. We have a powerful potential in our humanity to survive the cesspool war against humanity that is currently in progress and come out as victors. This has been done before, in 1648 with the Treaty of Westphalia that established the platform of universal sovereignty for all nations. We can revive this treaty and take it beyond and to the heart and give ourselves a world of peace and build on it. We can do this. We can begin today to do what has never been done fully before. We can do this by looking forward, not backwards. Like seeds are we, from an infinite fountain, carriers of secrets still unknown, sentinels of intelligence forever unfolding, prophets of the enduring, apostles of power in an endless landscape of good.